The hardline Iranian regime executes more of its citizens than any country in the world except China, including many human rights activists. The lack of checks and balances makes a small group of mullahs at the top completely unaccountable to the people. Freedom of speech, religion, and the press are all strictly curtailed. So who is fighting back? And how will this murderous regime end? During and after the 1979 Islamist Revolution, many organizations fought for an alternative to the emerging theocracy. The National Movement of the Iranian Resistance, a coalition of opposition groups inside and outside of Iran, emerged in the 1950s from the National Front led by Mohammad Mossadeqh. Founded by Dr. Shapour Bakhtiar, the last prime minister under the Shah, the NMIR advocated for secularism, human rights, democracy, and the overthrow of the clerical regime. Unfortunately, Bakhtiar was stabbed to death along with another NMIR leader, Soroush Katiba, while in exile in Paris in 1991. Meanwhile, the People's Mujahadeen of Iran, now known as the Mujahadeen-e-Khalq, or MEK, was founded in 1965 by students who opposed the Shah. They adopted a Marxist Islamist platform and contributed to the overthrow of the Shah. However, under Masoud Rajavi, who led the group from 1972 until 2003, the group transformed, eventually advocating for democracy, secularism, and notably gender equality, garnering support from Iran's middle-class intelligentsia. The MEK boycotted the '79 constitutional referendum, which led Khomeini to bar Rajavi from the 1980 elections. In '81, the MEK launched an armed uprising against the regime. It ultimately failed, and the regime cracked down hard on its members, arresting and executing many. By the mid-'80s, the MEK was forced to flee to Iraq under the protection of Saddam Hussein. They continued to launch attacks from Iraq, and in 1998, at the end of the Iran-Iraq War, the regime initiated a fatwa against them. The MEK maintains that in the summer of '88 alone, over 30,000 political prisoners, the majority of whom were MEK members, were brutally massacred. The election of Mohammad Khatami as president in 1997 provided a ray of hope for the pro-democracy movement, as his term saw a flourishing civil society, a growing independent media, social reforms aimed at gender equality, and a détente with the West. Despite the initial optimism, however, conservative elements in the political establishment, including the Guardian Council and the judiciary, fought back. The hardliners even attempted to assassinate Khatami in 1999. The burgeoning media was subjected to harassment and arbitrary arrests. Conservatives used their influence over election-related bodies to disqualify reformist candidates, most notably in the 2004 parliamentary elections. Then, the 2005 presidential election marked a turning point, with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's victory signaling the resurgence of the conservatives. In 2009, the Green Movement emerged after Ahmadinejad was re-elected in a vote marred by widespread fraud and electoral manipulation. The movement got its name from the color adopted by the primary opposition candidate, Mir Hossein Mousavi. Ahmadinejad was declared the winner by a wide margin within just hours of the polls closing. The election results ignited a massive street protest in major cities across Iran. It is estimated that the Tehran protest on June 15th of 2009 alone drew over 1 million people. The government cracked down hard as security forces, including the despised Basij militia, engaged in violent confrontation with the protesters. Thousands of activists and opposition leaders were arrested, and many were imprisoned and tortured. In November of 2019, widespread protests again erupted across Iran in response to a stagnant economy and a sudden fuel price hike. What began as economic grievances quickly transformed into broader demands for political change and an end to the theocratic rule. The government again responded with a heavy-handed crackdown, and it is estimated over 1,500 people were killed by security forces in the incident. Then, in September of 2022, 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, a Kurdish student and aspiring lawyer, joined a peaceful protest in Tehran while accompanied by her family. According to witnesses, Amini was arrested by the state's guidance patrol for improperly wearing her hijab, for which she was severely beaten. She collapsed and died in a hospital 3 days later. The authorities initially said she had a heart attack and fabricated a past medical condition. The news was met with outrage and disbelief among the Iranian population. Protests immediately broke out in her hometown of Saqqez, but quickly spread to all major cities. Thus, the Woman Life Freedom Movement was born. Unlike some previous protests, the Woman Life Freedom Movement included both urban middle classes and rural working areas. It was the largest protest movement since the 1979 revolution. Protesters advocated for wider political freedoms, women's rights, and an end to the theocratic regime. The regime predictably responded with a rash of arrests, violence, internet shutdowns, and even executions of protesters. Since the protests began, nearly 20,000 of Iran's citizens have been arrested, and at least 500 have been killed by security forces. So who is fighting the tyranny of the Iranian government today? Do any of them have the power to overthrow this barbaric regime? Mohammad Khatami survived the attempt on his life and the conservatives' campaign against him, and he continues to push for reform from within the Iranian political establishment today. He has been banned from appearing in the media for years, but together with Mir Hossein Mousavi, who has been under house arrest since 2011, he has recently voiced his support for the Woman Life Freedom Movement. Mohammad Reza Shah's son and former Crown Prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, has also been a vocal critic of the Iranian regime. He has called for nonviolent civil disobedience and advocated for a secular and democratic government that protects human rights. However, he has also considered a revival of a constitutional monarchy, and the Iranian people cannot afford to go backward. Despite the contributions of these men, it's women who are making the biggest impact on Iran's future. In 2002, Shirin Ebadi, an Iranian lawyer, writer, and activist, co-founded Center for Defenders of Human Rights, an organization that has played a critical role in fighting for the rights of individuals, promoting democracy, and defending activists in Iran. She won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2003 for her efforts. The center has endured raids of its offices and constant threats to its members. The center's co-founder, Nasrin Sotoudeh, spent a decade in prison on charges of endangering national security and propaganda against the regime. The center's vice president, Narges Mohammadi, has also been in prison for over a decade and has endured up to 80 lashes on multiple occasions. Despite being tortured, she still campaigns against her oppressors from behind bars. If you want real heroes, look no further than these incredible women. Masoud Rajavi disappeared in 2003 under suspicious circumstances, but his widow, Miriam, took his place as leader of the MEK and still leads the group today, along with its umbrella political organization, the National Council of Resistance of Iran. Although the MEK supported the holding of American hostages in '79, the U.S. lifted their designation as a foreign terrorist organization in 2012, and several prominent American politicians have recognized it as a legitimate government in exile. Under Miriam Rajavi's leadership, the NCRI continues to advocate for the overthrow of the Iranian regime, democratic reforms, gender equality, and human rights in Iran from its base in Albania to where it located in 2016 with help from the UN. However, the group is reviled by many Iranians for its support of Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War of 1980 through 88, and both Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have raised questions about the treatment of their members. Many have gone so far as to label it a cult which worships the Rajavis, and the Albanian government even raided its offices recently. In summary, the current Iranian regime is pure evil and can neither be negotiated with nor reformed from within. They are diametrically opposed to concepts of political pluralism, basic human rights, and institutional checks and balances. Although the Woman Life Freedom protests have dwindled somewhat in 2023, they laid bare the deep-seated frustration of Iranians with the status quo and showcased the opposition movement's ability to mobilize. Iran today is a powder keg of growing resentment toward the hardline regime and may combust at any time at the slightest provocation. The end of the Iranian regime has begun, and it's only a matter of time until they are relegated to the trash heap of history. We anticipate this will occur within 5 years. The question will be, what type of government will follow? Given the fractured nature of the pro-democracy resistance, it's difficult to see an organization with enough support and military strength to take the reins after this regime. The more likely scenario is the emergence of a military leader with more authoritarianism to follow. If there is to be any hope for democracy, resistance groups will need to coalesce. Thus, we call on Miriam Rajavi and the MEK to cease their claim to be the only alternative to the regime. Their brand is too tarnished with the Iranian people. Reza Pahlavi, too, should end his claim to leadership. The Iranian pro-democracy resistance needs a broader coalition. Who will lead that coalition is yet to be determined, but we hope true leaders arise. We expect that Shirin Ebadi will be among them. Long live the great people of Iran, and long live the resistance.